Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on a foundation for data marketplaces, how to build a robust data supply chain. I'm very eager to talk about this topic. I think it's one of the emerging trends of this year and next. And to help me talk about this, I have with me Nicholas Doyen, Chief Product Officer of Revelate. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thanks, Wayne. Pleasure to be here. I'm really excited for the conversation today. I think it's, as you said, an emerging market that also presents a lot of opportunity for organizations and industries to evolve. So I'm excited to dig into the topic today.
All right, let's jump right in then. First thing we need to do is talk about what a data marketplace is. And I've created this little definition here: a website or a cloud data platform, and that's kind of an ode to some of the cloud data players like Snowflake and Databricks that are inching into this territory, that enables data providers and data consumers to exchange data in a frictionless manner. We'll talk a lot about frictionless stuff going forward in this. But as you can see on the left, data providers take data from multiple sources, could be inside the company or outside the company, and turn those into one or more data products that within the space of a data marketplace, consumers can browse, discover, find, negotiate, evaluate, and eventually purchase and acquire and integrate into their own business systems. They're on the right. Now, notice that I said there's an exchange here. Didn't necessarily say there was a transactional involving money. I didn't say data sellers or consumers, but if there is a transaction, a financial transaction, then we would call these data providers data sellers, and data consumers we'd call data buyers. But a lot of marketplaces today, there is no financial transaction for one reason or another, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now, there's one other constituency here, and that is the data operator. That's the organization that actually runs the marketplace. And probably a fourth constituency here that's not being shown is the vendor whose software is running the data marketplace. And in the past, we've called those data exchange platform providers, or now data marketplace platform providers. And we'll talk about and mention a bunch of those going forward. And as you can imagine, Revelate is one of those software vendors that provides data marketplace software. So some of the characteristics of a marketplace from a scope perspective, these marketplaces can be global, they can be regional or country-based, they can be industry-based, they can be company-based, or they can be focused on a specific technology like streaming data. From a data products perspective, the products themselves, the content could be anything from data sets to queries to ML models, reports, even notebooks, and I'm sure other things to come. A lot of different transactions. Obviously, you can charge for your product, and that can be on a monthly subscription or a one-time purchase or pay as you go. It could also be token-based. In other words, you may have a relationship with a data provider outside of the marketplace, and you're conducting a transaction privately, and you are assigned a token that you can bring into a marketplace, and that gives you access to the data that that provider has placed on that marketplace. It could be subscription-based, where you pay a monthly fee to access products in the marketplace. Transactions could also be free, and most of the time, it's a combination of all of these things. From an access perspective, the marketplace could be public, open to anyone. It could be private, for just members of an industry, a consortium, or even employees of a company or their suppliers. Or it could be permissioned. In other words, it could be either public or private, but still to access specific products or even see specific products, the data provider has to grant you specific permission. So a lot of marketplaces provide whitelisting and blacklisting services to control access to their products. And then for types, let's go to the next slide. Before I do that, Nicholas, to you, any comments on this? Any additions elaborations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a really good job of situating what a data marketplace is, and particularly the role that it plays in the relationship between providers and consumers. I think one of the things that we see often is people think of marketplaces as a place where multiple providers are operating within. And I know in our next slide, we're going to introduce different types of marketplaces, but I think the idea that a marketplace is just a conduit to connect a provider to a consumer in a variety of fashions is a really important nuance that we need to focus in on, where we see lots of data providers starting on these multi-provider marketplaces and then realizing that they need to spend more effort and more time on the direct relationship between themselves and their consumers, and then transitioning into a marketplace that they run by themselves. And as you said, in the scope, that company-based marketplace is one that we're starting to see pop up more and more because of the opportunity it presents to the provider to manage the relationship at a much deeper level with the consumers of their data. So I think the variety is really interesting to analyze, and the different types of approaches present a lot of different value add opportunities for the provider to offer to the consumers. So I think going to the next slide, we can definitely start to talk about those, but it's a really exciting space and really interesting to continue to dig into.
Right. So I think what I hear you saying is that a data provider might position or place or publish their products on multiple marketplaces, but also create their own marketplace for their own products.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about types of data marketplaces here, as Nicholas has alluded to some of them. You know, the first one, and I think the one that pops into most people's mind, is an external data marketplace, or what I was probably calling a global data marketplace. This has a many to many relationship between data suppliers and consumers. The converse of that is an internal data marketplace. It's also many to many suppliers and consumers, but they're employees or possibly suppliers, so that would kind of make it external. Another is what we're calling a buyer hub, where it's a one-to-many relationship. So there's one buyer and many sellers. So this would be a typical supplier network. So big companies like Walmart or the US government, the Kroger's, might have their own buyer hub, right? And using marketplace software to run that for ease and to create that frictionless interchange between their suppliers and themselves. And then conversely from that, you might have a seller hub, which is what Nicholas was talking about, where you might have a large data provider that is trying to attract lots of buyers. And although it may have its products on an external data marketplace, say run by Amazon or Snowflake, it probably also has its own marketplace for just its products. So in terms of external data marketplaces, we kind of mentioned they could be global in scope, you know, any type of product from any type of company anywhere in the world. Could be focused just on an industry, and we're seeing these pop up all over the place. Could be for a country. We're seeing countries like Japan start their own marketplaces, or it could be a consortium of companies that have gotten together to transact business and using a marketplace to support that. So some of the global data marketplaces that are out there today are from, no surprise, some of the biggest cloud data platform providers out there. Amazon definitely has first mover advantage, and Databricks says they're going to launch their data marketplace next year. Like Snowflake, they offer data sharing services now and are working to add the requisite commercial transaction and other types of features. Google and Microsoft have initiatives, haven't gained a lot of traction. Narrative.io is a very specialized data marketplace that allows you to query data from multiple providers because it's normed all the data sets. That's pretty cool and unique. In terms of software for creating data marketplaces, these are the main players today, Revel 8, and you'll hear more about them from Nicholas. Crux, more focused on helping buyers, data buyers, kind of integrate data into their own systems. And those buyers could be traditional enterprises, or they could be data marketplaces in themselves that need to acquire and integrate data into their own platform. Daleks, Harbor Data, Informatica, which is unique because it's the only one that sells just internal data marketplaces, whereas all the others can support both external and internal. I already mentioned narrative.io, Snowflake, and Databricks. So you can go to these companies to help set up a marketplace, whether it's a global industry, country, consortium, or company data marketplace, or a buyer or seller hub. Nicholas, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen, especially when it comes to the global data marketplaces, is the technology vendors are some of the first movers setting up their own, particularly because it helps to sell consumption, right? A lot of these different entities are looking to bring people into their ecosystem and using the providers that are offering data there as an incentive to bring buyers, and then vice versa, buyers as an incentive to bring providers. And it's very natural for us to start and see that type of activity because of the way that the technology vendors are positioning themselves. One of the things that we see as a great opportunity is extending on top of those ecosystems and providing marketplaces that are more centralized around the provider themselves to, again, establish that relationship. While still servicing into these different ecosystems on the technology side or on the industry side. And what we really see starting to form is this widespread ecosystem of data sharing, where providers are going to be found everywhere, and buyers are going to be found everywhere, and consumers are going to be found everywhere. And ideally getting to a state where everyone's transacting and sharing data as a way to start to continue the collaboration between the different institutions. So I think the software vendors, ourselves included, are really important in helping to cultivate this data sharing ecosystem. And if we're able to do that effectively, I think, again, it's going to open doors that really everyone's been waiting for when it comes to data usage and data monetization, where they need that external data to really get to the true value propositions. So I think these are really good classifications of different styles of marketplaces. And I think all of them have a place inside of the industry. And it's when all of these are working together that I think we're going to see all the great value that can come from that.
You know, it's interesting with the internet, on the consumer side, we found that consumers will go do their research on the internet and then maybe go to a store and actually buy the product. Yeah. And I think we may be seeing the same thing here. People may go to the global data marketplaces just to see what's available, but when they want to transact and actually acquire the data, they'll go to a seller hub more than likely, because the amount of features that are available there to create a frictionless transaction. Yeah. To help you truly evaluate that data set so you know exactly what you're getting, and you can negotiate terms interactively so you only pay for what you want, and you can just set up the distribution so you don't have to wrestle with APIs and FTPs. It just goes right into the database that you need it to go into. So because of a lot of those things, I think, Nicholas, you said this earlier, suppliers of data are going to be everywhere, right? And the users will follow them to the external marketplace, the global one, and then to actually do a transaction, they may go to their own seller hub. Yeah. So, yeah. All right. So let's turn the tables here. We'd like to know a little bit about all of you listening. So, Sarah, could you show the first poll? And by the way, as she's pulling this up, if you have a question, just hit the Q&A button on the panel and type your question, and we'll take those during and after the event. All right, so the first poll, very simple. What is your role in the data marketplace? So choose either you're a data consumer or buyer, you're a data provider or seller, or you're a data marketplace operator. We probably should have had multiple choice there, but for simplicity purposes, let's just pick one. I see Nicholas and I cannot vote. Now I'm going to assume all of you have answered that. So Sarah, could you show us the results on that? All right, data consumer 41%, data provider seller 24%, data marketplace operator 35%. Now, I wouldn't have guessed an even spread like that. What do you think, Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too surprised because I think in order for this space to really come alive, everybody needs to be educated on it, right? The buyers need to have an understanding of what they're looking for from a provider. The providers need to understand different approaches they can take to bringing data to market. Marketplace operators need to understand what they need to enable providers to and consumers to be able to do within their platform. So I'm really excited to see an even spread because I think it demonstrates this interest from all sides of the coin to learn more about the process and help guide each other towards proper solutions that benefit everyone. So yeah, I think it's a great turnout.
Excellent. All right, well, let's move on. All right, so what are the benefits? And maybe all of you in the audience know this already, but we'll just go through it. For consumers, buyers, there's been a lot of pain associated with acquiring external data over the years. It's been very difficult to find the right data set, make sure it's exactly what you need, and it can take months. And then you have the challenges of integrating it. So from a discovery perspective, marketplaces hold the promise of one-stop shopping. Go one place and get all the data you need. Instead of having multiple people inside your company go to multiple places to find and buy data without knowing what everyone else in the company is doing. I've mentioned frictionless transactions, and we'll talk more about that, but basically eliminating a lot of the pain that I just talked about from the beginning to the end of the whole process, from finding the right data to actually integrating it with your own data. Buy only what you need. In the past, people had to buy these huge files that came on CDs or SFTP servers, and when they finally got them, they may use 2% of it and throw away the rest. But they had to pay for the whole thing. So now we're seeing value-based pricing, which is a big boon. The ability to define a team inside of a marketplace. So you can assign administrator can assign buyers. You can set budgets for each of your buyers. You can allocate people to buy from different regions of the world or different categories of data, et cetera, et cetera. It starts to rationalize the buying behavior inside organizations, which has been frankly quite chaotic until now. And as I mentioned earlier, the targeted data distribution. So once you buy some data or a data set, having that sent directly to where you need it in the format you need it. For providers and sellers, as we were just talking about, these new marketplaces provide a new channel for them to not only sell their data products, but also make them more visible to a larger number of people, many of whom may actually, as we said, do the transaction on the seller's site. A lot of this new software makes data onboarding and the creation of data products much, much easier. It's almost point and click. They have much more flexible controls about who can access what, and you can decide where to deliver it in what format. So a lot more flexibility around controls and delivery. And a lot of these platforms also offer a variety of data enrichment services. One of the bugaboos of external data is that, the provider may change schema and the buyer's unaware, and then the pipeline they've built breaks. Or all of a sudden the data set is full of nulls and no one's caught that. Well, now there's services that validate the data on demand and upon execution to avoid those kind of issues. And for operators, this software makes it much easier to kind of host an ecosystem and bring all the players together in an ecosystem to begin to interact and transact and learn what each other does and get a better sense of marketplace dynamics and competitive pressures and how that's influencing product pricing and purchasing behavior and all that good stuff. So, for instance, you may have a marketplace, actually this is a real example of auto parts in Europe. And this marketplace might also have insurance providers on that who are providing insurance data or consuming data to improve the accuracy of their insurance rates for these types of auto parts providers. Might have lawyers, it might have resellers, it might have all kinds of different players in that marketplace who come together on this website to interact and understand their marketplace better. Any thoughts on that, Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, again, does a good job introducing a lot of the players inside of this space and the value add. I think, we're really talking here about those multi-provider marketplaces, and there's a lot of value that comes in from that. I think one of the things that's really important to highlight here, and it's somewhat in response to Stephen's question in the Q&A about frictionless transactions. I think one of the things that also needs to be identified is what is a data product, and what are the data products being offered on these marketplaces. It's really important for the providers and the operators to work together to identify what data products make sense to sit next to each other, what data products are going to support what the consumers are looking to accomplish with them, and finding that common definition so that when a consumer or buyer goes to these marketplaces, they know what they're actually looking at and what they're looking for. So, I think the opportunities are kind of endless for these marketplaces, but there are a lot of challenges and difficulties to actually getting on the same page of all these different providers and within the operator and the marketplace. And I think that's one of the things we'll talk a little bit more about, but one of the things blocking a lot of the adoption of marketplaces, I think, is creating that consistent interaction and experience for the consumers that's still valuable and accomplishes the goals that they have.
Great. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about market drivers for these data marketplaces here. So these are reasons why people are looking to get external data. Data science is driving it probably more than anything. The need to enrich your customer profiles using third-party data is a huge one. We're seeing the rise of data clean rooms to support that as cookies go away. Digital transformation, kind of the same thing. Digital marketing, measure advertising performance in the cookieless world. And then, there's just this move to monetize data. A lot of companies are sitting on these data gold mines, and they could make hundreds of thousands of dollars if they package up their internal data sets, anonymize them, and make them available on these marketplaces. That's a huge driver. Regulations and compliance is a huge driver, like ESG. A lot of financial and privacy regulations are requiring organizations to go outside of their own data and supplement it with external data to support these regulatory requirements. They need to understand the marketplace they're competing in and who the players are and how they're moving is a big reason to get external data. And I'll have to change the order of these animations here. But number one is, as we said earlier, is reducing the pain of selling and buying external data, which with these marketplaces can be pretty instantaneous, whereas in the old days, it might take, months to do anything. So, Sarah, we have another poll here. So why don't we pull that up? It's a little bit more complicated, but we're going to ask, what's your interest in marketplaces, data marketplaces? Check all that apply. 1, reduce the pain of acquiring and integrating external data, as we just talked about. Package and sell and monetize our own data assets. So those first two are really for consumers. Streamline the acquisition of supplier or partner data. Operate an internal data marketplace of data providers and data consumers within our company. Operate an external data marketplace of many buyers and sellers. And create a better storefront to sell third-party data assets that we've acquired. So a little bit for everyone there, buyers, sellers, and operators. All right, take a couple seconds to check the ones that apply to your organization. And Sarah, why don't we show the results here? Should be pretty evenly spread. Yeah, it pretty much is there. The biggest one with 50% is operate an internal data marketplace of data providers and data consumers within our company. Okay, that makes sense given Eckerson Group's traditional audience. We typically message and write for data and analytics leaders in mid-sized to large enterprises. So most of them, especially if they're following the data mesh type of architecture need an internal data marketplace to allow people to make those products available to everyone else.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo that, we're seeing, there's a lot of benefits of thinking about data marketplaces and data products for internal usage. It's what we see as one of the biggest opportunities actually is helping to democratize data across the institution. I think a great example of this is, many organizations have been investing in data science and in business analytics and BI tools and resources inside their company over the past 20 years to deliver on the promise that data has been presenting. And one of the things that they're seeing is they have all these resources, they have all these technologies so that they can do amazing insights and analysis of data. And the bottleneck is actually accessing the data itself and knowing what's available inside your firm, knowing what you've been purchasing, and then getting it in the format that the analysts need or the data scientists need. So I think it's one of the biggest challenges that people are facing at the moment is that they have so many resources that are waiting to actually start analyzing the data and just don't have the best ways available to them to democratize that and get it into their hands. So I think the internal data marketplace is one that allows organizations to offer this self-service layer to those data scientists that they can then, kind of go through that process themselves and begin to do the analysis they need to do.
All right, well, let's move on. So the evolution of data marketplaces. So back in the 1990s and even earlier, we had data brokers. Those were businesses that, sold data sets, usually providing those via CDs, FTP, or APIs. Very cumbersome. Terms were very inflexible. Top vendors in the space were Axiom, Experian, Epsilon, CoreLogic, and they're still there. In fact, they're leveraging some of this newer technology that we're talking about to upscale their own data storefronts and make them much easier for people to buy just what they need. Around 2020, we started seeing the rise of mostly these global data marketplaces led by Amazon. And the file exchange there was through cloud buckets, essentially, being in S3. And the Amazon is, really set the bar in terms of not only providing data products from multiple different data providers to any data consumers, but it also introduced commerce. So they're way ahead of the rest in terms of that capability. As we said, all the major cloud data platform vendors are moving to provide these global public data marketplaces. Some of the niche vendors like DOX and Narrative, DOX in particular was using that just to market or showcase its own data marketplace software. And then Narrative has the interesting ability to query multiple data sets from multiple providers. Now, this year and beyond, we're seeing marketplaces going into or transforming into marketplaces with deep integration. And this is the kind of upgraded seller hub that Nicholas was talking about, where there's all kinds of different services that filter, transform, query, distribute data, providing frictionless data evaluation, commerce, ingestion, and consumption for buyers. So making life a lot easier on the seller side and the buyer side. And in terms of data exchange, actually setting up custom data pipelines to pipe data right from the supplier's storage or the marketplace storage right into the customer's databases, data warehouses, data lakes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things I almost like to talk about this as the evolution of data products as well, right? Historically, the data brokers were distributing full data sets because the idea of cutting up that data set for a specific buyer to only contain what they want was just completely untenable. To then supporting some new distribution options through the cloud buckets, but still primarily file-based. Into now the custom data pipelines or the custom integrations that actually meet the end user where they're at. And we generally refer to this evolution of distribution options as from anywhere to anyone. And it's really making it so that wherever the provider is storing the data or how they're storing the data, the consumer doesn't really care. The consumer wants to receive it in the way in which they're going to best use it and best interact with it. And the provider needs to offer those services to actually meet that consumer where they're at. And so this deep integration is this expansion of the concept of a data product. It's going beyond just a flat file that's being distributed through some different protocol means into an actual service and integration that allows the consumer to select explicitly and specifically what it is that they want to receive and how they want to receive it. And I think that's all about that acceleration and that frictionless interaction between the provider and the consumer that needs to exist so that data exchange and data sharing is much more commonplace and much more understood, so that we can again get down to the actual value, which is monetizing data within a firm, both external data and internal data more effectively.
All right. So what should you look for in a data marketplace platform? Well, if you're a data consumer or buyer, you need to ask, does this marketplace and its suppliers within it deliver raw data, data that's been normalized so that you could query it against multiple data sets, or derived data? If you're doing data science, typically people just want raw data. But if you're maybe doing business intelligence, that derived summary data is important. Buyers also want to make sure they can validate the quality of what they're buying and that it's compliant with industry regulations before they buy, not after. They want to have that content, as Nick was just saying, be distributed however they need it, via files, through services, whether it's streaming or other means, or queries. And then also, does it support an application marketplace that provides a set of enrichment services, such as data quality, data validation, data governance, and other things of that sort? Data clean rooms. For sellers, can you white label the platform so it looks like your own? Does it facilitate commerce or just tokens? Does it store data in the marketplace, or does it fetch it on demand from the seller's storage? Because if you have petabytes of data that you want to sell, moving that into a marketplace may be untenable, right? So you want to just keep it where it is and have the marketplace pull it and then push it to the consumer on demand. Does it support simple or complex licensing terms? Because consumers want things every which way, and best if you can support that. Finally, for operators, is the software a SaaS service, or does it run on premises? Does it run just on one cloud platform, or does it run on multiple clouds? Does it use open or proprietary storage? In other words, do you have to store it in one cloud data platform's storage bank, or can you store it wherever you want to, as we said, and then it gets pulled on demand? Nicholas, anything you want to add here? Basic requirements for purchasing these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great basic list, right? And one of the challenges with data in general, but especially data products and marketplaces, is the devil's in the details, right? And so I think these are great places to start, especially, as you're starting to consider what role you want to play inside of data exchange and data interaction between the provider and consumer. But there's a lot of things that need to be considered beyond just the software. What is the strategy you want to take in order to get your data to market? What are the data products that you want to be producing, and how do you want to produce those data products such that they speak to the consumers? We sometimes refer to each of these, or we build frameworks for each of these different personas inside of the marketplace, because the things that they care about are often very different from one another, because the effort that goes into supporting each of those different frameworks is different, right? And so it's important for any seller to understand what an operator cares about and how they approach it, for them to understand what the consumer cares about and how they approach it, and then vice versa, for a consumer to care about what providers think about in order to then make asks of the providers that the providers will actually meet or have an incentive in meeting, right? And so I think it's important to take that holistic view at everything. And so it's good that we're talking about all the different personas together.
Yeah, and on that score, probably should have shown this slide before the last, but these are the core functions that a marketplace needs to support. And it's more complicated than traditional software because there are 3 separate constituencies. So, for sellers, the marketplace needs to support these basic processes, and they're very involved once you get into them. But the seller needs to acquire data itself, right? And then it needs to package that data into products, not just these big coarse-grained files, but products. And there's a lot of strategy, as Nicholas was saying, is what products do you create? You can parse files into multiple components. You can piece together data from different data sets and make that available. You can create derived data. You can sell it raw. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're packaging data into products. Defining access and terms is a really important process. The ability to interact with customers, because all customers want to know and ask questions. They want to know more about your product. And they may have custom requests that you'll need to address. Then finally, execute the transactions and distribute the data. Buyers essentially want a marketplace to make it easy to find the right data, to evaluate that data, make sure it's proper and it's going to meet their needs, negotiate terms with the sellers, purchase that data using terms that their company has set for them. The big one, ingest and integrate data, and then finally monitor and fix issues as they arise in those pipelines that are set up. So these are large categories of processes that every marketplace needs to support. And then for operating a marketplace, the operator using the software from the software provider needs to define account levels for using the marketplace for the operator and for all the sellers and buyers. What different levels of access and features do you want as a seller and a buyer, and what price points are those at? And then define options within each of those account levels for licensing, payments, languages, formats, targets. Define the architecture that you want to use within the constraints of the marketplace software itself. Where's the data going to be stored? What cloud platforms are going to be used? Important for sellers to create onboarding templates to make it really easy for them to ingest data, turn it into products, publish that. So templates that make it point and click easy to do that are what a lot of providers are doing. And then finally, create standard reports for usage, so buyers and sellers can monitor usage and transactions. So that is my last slide. And Nicholas, I think you're going to go into a lot more detail on some of these things. I just wanted to lay out for our viewers' perspective, essentially from top to bottom, what is a data marketplace? What are the components of it? What are the types and characteristics? What are some of the reasons people are implementing these and using these? And then finally, what are the processes that they need to support to be successful? So with that, Nicholas, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take the lead on showing slides.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about today is the marketplace itself and the types of personas that interact with it. And one of the nuances that we wanted to dig into is really on the idea of data productization in general, that process of taking raw data assets, turning them into data products, and then taking those to market, which we generally refer to as the data supply chain. And this is really a framework that's focused on the data providers themselves, giving them points of consideration and areas of care that they need to focus on as they start to approach productizing their data differently. Now, generally, we break up the data supply chain into 5 different stages that are, we present them distinctly as separate, but are deeply interconnected with one another, and the decisions that you make inside of them affect how the others actually come to fruition. And so these 5 stages we refer to as manufacture, package, commercialize, fulfill, and distribute. And we'll go into some detail on each of these and some of the areas of care for different providers within them.
So Nicholas, this is looking at data marketplaces through the lens of primarily a data seller. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So it's really, what are the things a data provider or a data seller needs to do in order to make a data product in the first place and then take it to market effectively.
Okay.
And so at a high level, one of the things that we really want to call out is that data productization is a process of preparing data so that consumers can get access to it and interact with it in the ways that they want to. And so everything we're going to talk about today is this process of data productization that serves the purpose of helping a data provider or a data consumer discover data products that are relevant to their use cases and evaluate how relevant they are, go through the procurement processes necessary in order to procure them, and then actually accessing them within the different native environments that they want to be receiving data. And so this is a very high level slide, obviously, but it's really there to focus in on everything that a data provider or a data seller does and cares about should be in the context of servicing the consumers effectively so that the consumers can get access to the data that they need in the right ways as quickly as possible so that they can get to value. And so if we start to look at these different stages individually, this is the diagram that we've produced for the manufacture process, which is really that main focus of dealing with the data itself and transforming it from the raw format or the raw structure that it may sit in into that data product that's going to be eventually distributed. And within this, there's sort of 3 different sections or stages within manufacture that we refer to that an organization or a data provider needs to go through in order to effectively manufacture data products. And these are refine, prepare, and produce. The refinement process is the process of taking that raw data asset and normalizing it into an externalizable capacity. Generally, data is produced for a very singular purpose. It may be produced to service an app or to track the activities of a given user or a given entity. And the data structure and the data that's held within that is aimed to serve that specific purpose. When you want to externalize that, you need to start to refine that into a data model and a data structure that is going to be relevant to those external parties and to different use cases that sit outside of the originally intended purpose of that data. The next stage is the preparation stage. So one of the things that I often tell my team and we tell our customers is that your data distribution options are highly dependent on the structure that the data sits in and the location that the data sits in. For those of you familiar with the Snowflake share, you cannot Snowflake share a PDF, for example. And so if you wanted to make that data accessible and available via Snowflake share, the PDF needs to be transformed and prepared into a format, a structure, and stored in a location that a Snowflake share can actually sit on top of. And so this process is a very important process of analyzing where your data sits right now and what types of distribution options and integration options you want to offer on top of that data or on top of that content. And then finally, the production stage, which is the producing of the data product that the end user is going to receive. One of the things that we talk a lot about is this idea of granular data products, which is going far beyond just distributing a data set as it's produced, and focuses in on enabling an end user to purchase and access only exactly what they're looking to receive, as opposed to the entirety of a data set or the entirety of a database that they could receive. And so those data products or those entities need to be produced in order for them to be distributed to the end user. Right?
Just question on the refined step was about normalization, right? So you're normalizing. Are you turning everything into a standard format and model there, or not that to that extent?
It depends, right? It depends on the type of engagement that you want to have. There's this allure of having a standard schema and a standard data dictionary for every single data set that you have. It's an allure, but it's not usually possible, right? And so you have to identify what standardization you want to have across data sets that you're offering, and what areas of those data sets you're going to have as differentiated or different from one another, right? This especially becomes relevant when you start to think about data marketplaces where your data is alongside many other data sets, and whether or not you're going to adhere to the expectations of those marketplaces, which sometimes have schema requirements, or if you're going to be able to present your data set in the unique way that's going to best make it speak and make it integratable with different use cases that you're looking to support.
Great.
Cool. The one other aspect that I wanted to call out here is the difference between a standard product and a custom product, which is a really important nuance to take into consideration as well, because it has a lot of implications on the production cost of data sets or data products that you're going to take to market. So we define a standard product as a data product that is identical regardless of whomever is going to be consuming it. Whereas a custom product is a data product that is produced specifically to the configurations or the expectations of a single customer. Now, for the consumer, they're always going to want the custom product because it's exactly what they need in exactly the way that they need it. But the reality is there's a lot of cost implications and overhead and maintenance that goes into supporting those types of products on the provider side. And so it's important to understand and do an analysis of the value benefit differentiation between those standard products and the custom products and the service and offering that you want to offer to your consumers. Cool. So that's the first stage. What we call the next stage is package. And this is really assigning all of the information that helps a data consumer or a data buyer better understand what this data product is, discover that data product amongst the sea of data products that it's presented against, and provide them with insights into what they can actually use that data product for in terms of the analysis or the integrations that they want to have. And we see really three different really important categories, data productization and packaging, that a provider needs to care about. The first being the description. How do you describe what this data product is, how it's relevant, how it's valuable, how it can be used, how it can be integrated, what questions it can answer, etc. I had seen a question that had come through in the Q&A that was asking, how do you describe data products that aren't just data sets or that vary in different formats? And the simple answer is you have to spend a lot of time figuring out what the best way to describe them is. And certain data marketplaces will have restrictions on what you can say and what information can be present. And that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of organizations starting to create their own seller hubs so that they can describe the data products in the best way possible, and then use the marketplaces as an entry point to discover that this data provider exists. It's also really important to describe the rights of this data product. So many organizations don't actually sell their data, they license it. You have a license to use that data product in very specific ways. And so as a data provider, it's important to be transparent around what kinds of usage rights you allow the data consumer to use the data for. Are they allowed to be a redistributor? Can they be creating derived content and then selling that derived content and so forth? And then finally, what are the governing principles around the data product that you're offering to the market? How are you going to allow those consumers to interact with the data set, but also how are you going to be governing that data product within your own firm, and who's responsible for auditing those rights and making sure that everything is being produced in the proper ways.
That's a great point about licensing versus selling data products. I think that evades a lot of people. And because in the old days, you would just get this file and then you did what you needed to do with it for the most part. But now there's a lot of restriction because you may be monetizing your own data sets as CVS, and you don't want Walgreens to use it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you certainly don't want people to use it to make more money for themselves by, as you said, deriving new data sets, reselling all or part of that data set. So the licensing is a very important part of this whole process.
Extremely important. Yeah, exactly. And so to dig into that a little bit further, our commercialized stage of the data supply chain is really looking at how you extend that understanding of license and then present that information to the data consumers and the data buyers. And one of the first stages of that is what we call optimizing products. And this is really coming back to that granular data product concept I introduced earlier, where it's very common nowadays to not just offer a full data set to a customer, but instead offer them subsets or subsections of that data product that really truly meet their needs and nothing more than that. If you talk to a lot of the historical data providers, especially in capital markets, you'll know that one of the biggest challenges that they have is historically they just sent all of the data sets and in their contract said, hey, you can't look at these 5 million rows or you're going to be in trouble. But they had no way of auditing that. They had no way of actually ensuring that the consumer wasn't respecting that or was respecting that. Where now, because of the new technologies that are present, you can offer data sets that are explicitly and specifically just the data product and information that the end user wants to receive. Within licensing, it's really important to think about what are the forms of licensing you're going to offer. Is it a one-time interaction that happens? Is it a subscription over time? Or is it going to be a pay-per-usage or a consumption-based model that you want to be licensing the data out on? And these types of considerations affect the price that you're presenting that data product to the market with. And then finally, coming back to the types and styles of marketplaces and go-to-market functions, the sell stage inside of Commercialize is in what form and what way do you want to be offering this data product to the market? And on what platforms are you looking to allow people to license that data through?
Nicholas, you mentioned custom versus standard products, and you said the custom products were usually more expensive. Can you say exactly how much more?
Without looking at specific data, I can't give exact numbers, but it kind of depends. If your customizations are going to, only allow them to choose specific columns to filter on, and you only have 500 options inside of there, you could actually build 500 granular standard products and offer that to the consumer. And then you're only producing those once a day. And so as long as you have fewer than 500 more than 500 customers that are consuming those, you're making off with a positive, right? And so it depends the level of customization that you would offer. And it's an analysis that we have a model that we support our clients with in order to do that analysis, but it's something that needs to be calculated by the data provider as they go to market.
Okay.
Cool. I recognize we're coming up on time, so I'll run through the last little bits. So the fourth stage of the data supply chain is the way in which the data provider fulfills orders or requests to access data. And we have 3 different stages that we've identified as important to think about when fulfilling a data order. And those are origination, handling, and execution. Origination talks about how does that order come to originate? Is it a self-service marketplace? Is it directly over a request line? Is it through a standardized ticket inside of a ticketing system like Jira or ServiceNow? What is the process in which that order originates? Then handling looks at who is responsible for handling that order and walking through the procurement steps and the execution steps in order for the data to be produced and distributed to the consumer. And then finally, that execution stage, how is the actual data product produced? Is it produced ahead of time because it's a standard product? Is it produced after the fact because it's a custom product? And who's responsible for engaging in that process of fulfillment? And so this is where we see a lot of that pain that we talk about when it comes to data marketplaces existing, is for the provider, how heavily invested do you want your engineering and data teams to be involved in the fulfillment of an order, and how much time is it going to take for that fulfillment to happen?
I assume for standard products, the process is mostly automated. Is that correct?
It should be. Now, it depends too on the marketplace technology that you have to support standard products, but definitely if they're standard, it should be a relatively automated flow in order to do fulfillment. Yeah.
Okay.
And so then the last stage of the data supply chain is the distribution options. And these are the ones that are supported inside of our platform, but there are a number of other extensions or styles that need to be considered as well. I saw a question about real-time streaming in here earlier on, but it's important to think about how will your consumers want to consume the data, and what systems or downstream activities are they going to do on top of the data in order for the provider to understand and support the different distribution mechanisms that best interact with that type of system. And so this comes back to that maturity change that we talked about earlier, where people are looking for more embedded marketplaces and embedded systems where they can get the data directly inside of analysis platforms that they want to be. So this is what we call the data supply chain. It's multiple steps, and obviously this is still a very high level introduction to some of these stages, but hopefully it starts to illustrate all of the different things that a data provider needs to think about when it comes to the strategy that they take to take data products to market. Wayne, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of what we just presented.
Yeah, no. Wow, this is I learned a lot. Nicholas is great drilling down into the details. As I've researched this area, I've realized that it is a lot more complicated than you would think. And to do it right takes a lot of effort and thought and good software and good processes internally. So there's a lot here that I think people need to absorb. But I think maybe we could leave, Nicholas, with just a projection of where you think this market is going, despite the complexities that we presented and the software that's trying to, ease that complexity and create these frictionless transactions. It seems to me like this is a burgeoning area.
Yeah, we think, and our company is entirely surrounded around this space, so it may not come as a surprise, but we see this as the key to really delivering on a lot of the promise that data has been given over the past 20 years. What I said earlier about how organizations have spent a lot of time and energy investing into technologies and resources for data analysis, the missing piece is actually having access to the right data to analyze. And we think that, empowering organizations, data providers, and data consumers alike to more effectively share data is the most important aspect and stage that we need to address in order to deliver on that promise. So we think it's going to be a huge market. We think it's going to be a really exciting space where lots of different styles and types of organizations will be interacting, and we're super excited to be a part of that journey.
And do you think internal or external marketplaces will predominate? And last question.
Great question. I think it's going to start with internal because there's a lot of fear still about externalizing data. But the beauty of a marketplace is a lot of the tools that support external activity support internal and vice versa. And so I think we'll get to a state in the next 20 or so years where every organization has both an internal and an external marketplace that they're facilitating data exchange through.
And can that be one and the same? So you mature your internal marketplace, then you flip a switch and you can decide what part of that can be externalized, or do you think it would be two separate platforms?
Well, with our technology, you can do exactly that. So we think that's the future as well, yeah.
Cool. Okay, good place to stop. Thank you, Nicholas, for all your insights. Great conversation, and thank all of you for tuning in. We hope we answered your questions. If not, please send us whatever you have and we'll address them.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.